He sat at the edge of the sidewalk, his world painted in shades of sound. The air smelled of damp asphalt and roasted peanuts, and every few minutes, a car would roll by with a different hum, some smooth like silk, others coughing like they needed mercy. The blind man tilted his head slightly, brush in hand, his fingers moving over the canvas as if the fabric itself whispered directions. $5 for a portrait, he murmured softly. His voice carried no pity, just quiet invitation. Most people walked past him like he was part of the street, a forgotten monument of struggle. But that day, a car stopped right in front of him. You could tell it was expensive just by the way it sighed when the door opened. The man who stepped out wasn't ordinary. His shoes made no sound, his cologne carried confidence, and the people walking behind him seemed to part like water. He stopped right in front of the blind artist. "Are you really blind?" the man asked. The artist smiled. "That's what they tell me." The man chuckled lightly. "And you paint faces?" "I paint souls," the artist said quietly, dipping his brush into a jar that looked like it had been used since time began. The man hesitated. "You don't even know what I look like." "I don't have to," the artist replied. "Your voice tells me enough." A small crowd began to form, watching. People took out their phones. Some were whispering, laughing, some filming, waiting for the blind man to fail. The man in the suit, the CEO, folded his arms. "All right then, show me what you can do." The blind artist nodded. He reached forward, gently touching the air in front of the CEO's face, then stopped, his fingers trembling just an inch away from skin. "May I?" he asked. The CEO, intrigued, leaned closer. "Go ahead." The artist's fingertips brushed the man's jawline, feeling the faint shadow of a beard. Then his cheekbone, then the curve of his nose. His hands moved carefully, respectfully, tracing memory into shape. He smiled softly. "You have tired eyes." The CEO frowned. "Excuse me." "You carry weight in your voice," the artist said. "Not money weight, guilt weight." The crowd went silent. Even the cars seemed to slow down for a moment. The artist turned back to his canvas, his hands flowing in rhythm. Every stroke was confident, unhurried. He painted as if he could see what others couldn't. Minutes passed. Then an hour. People began to whisper. Some left, others stayed. But the CEO, he couldn't move. Something about this man, blind yet full of vision, held him captive. Finally, the artist stopped. He set the brush down, breathing softly. "It's done." The CEO stepped forward, his voice calm but curious. "Can I see it?" The artist smiled. "You already do." The CEO frowned slightly, confused. Then he turned the canvas around. What he saw made his chest tighten. It was his face, but not like a photo. The painting showed him looking older, lonelier, and behind those painted eyes was something hollow. The background wasn't gold or bright, it was gray, and faintly behind his portrait, another image appeared. A small boy, reaching for his father's hand. The CEO's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "How?" he whispered. "How did you?" "I told you," the artist interrupted gently. "I paint souls." The CEO took a step back. His eyes darted over the painting. "That boy. Who is that?" "You tell me," the artist said. For the first time in a long while, the CEO's voice trembled. "That was my son." The crowd murmured. The blind man tilted his head. "Was." The CEO swallowed hard, forcing a breath. "He passed. Years ago." The blind artist bowed his head. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring pain." But the CEO shook his head slowly. "No. You didn't bring pain. You brought truth." He looked around. Cameras were still recording, faces staring, but in that moment he didn't care. The city faded away. "How did you know?" the CEO whispered again. The artist's blind eyes looked somewhere beyond him. "Your voice cracked when you laughed. That's how grief sounds." The CEO stood frozen. 4 years, he'd buried that part of himself. He'd built companies, made millions, appeared on magazine covers, but that tiny break in his laugh was the one thing no one ever noticed. No one except this blind man sitting on a corner with cracked paint jars and a plastic stool. He stepped closer. "What's your name?" The artist smiled faintly. "David." The CEO extended his hand. "I'm Mr. Rains," the artist finished softly. "You own Rains Industries." The CEO blinked. "You know me." "I listen to the news," David said. "I can't see, but I still hear." "Then why me?" "Because," David said, "people with power need to remember they still have faces." That line hit the CEO so hard that he forgot to breathe for a second. He looked at David again, at the man who painted him without seeing him, and saw something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, humility, and peace. "David," he said quietly, "how long have you been doing this?" David shrugged. "Since I lost my sight. About 20 years. "You lost it how?" David smiled faintly. "Fire accident. I was a construction worker. Wrong place, wrong time." The CEO's eyes widened slightly. "You used to be a builder?" "I still am," David said. "Only now, I build what people forget." The CEO stared at him. Something shifted inside. He turned and looked at the canvas again. The image seemed to breathe. David spoke softly. "You've been searching for something. Not money, not success. Something that doesn't come with a signature." The CEO took a deep breath. "You sound like you know me." "I only know what pain sounds like," David said. "And you sound tired." The CEO didn't respond. He just stood there for a long while, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a gold credit card, and placed it on the stool beside David. "How much do I owe you?" David smiled and shook his head. "I don't sell truth, sir. You already paid when you stopped to listen." The CEO froze. He looked at the card, then back at David. "You're not serious." "I am," David said. "But if you really want to pay me, buy a painting from the man across the street. He has 3 kids." That silence between them felt heavier than the noise of the city. The CEO didn't know what to say. He looked around, noticing the younger artist sitting opposite, no one paying attention to him. He walked over, bought one of his small, shaky portraits for $500, and walked back. David smiled faintly when he heard the transaction. "That's worth more than gold, sir." The CEO looked down. "You ever wish you could see again?" David hesitated. "I used to. But then I realized, when I had sight, I missed what really mattered. Now I see everything, just not with these." He pointed to his eyes, clouded and pale. The CEO's throat tightened again. "You know, you remind me of someone." David smiled. "Your son." The CEO nodded. "He used to talk like that. Always finding meaning in things." David turned his face toward the wind. "Then maybe he's still talking." The CEO closed his eyes. The sound of the city, the smell of paint, the faint trembling in his hands, it all blurred into one feeling he hadn't known in years: peace. He looked at David again and said softly, "I'd like to help you." David tilted his head. "Help me paint?" "No," the CEO said. "Help you live better. I could get you a studio, your own place. Maybe some exposure." David laughed quietly. "Exposure doesn't feed the soul, Mr. Rains. I'm okay right here. But you could reach more people." "I reach the ones who stop," David said. "And those are the ones who need it." The CEO sighed softly. He admired him, but he didn't understand him yet. Not fully. A breeze moved between them. The CEO's phone buzzed, but he ignored it. For the first time in a long time, he didn't want to look at numbers, calls, or meetings. He wanted to stay in this silence. But just then, a loud voice interrupted them. "Hey! You can't be sitting here." It was a security guard from one of the nearby luxury stores. He pointed at David. "You've been told before. Move along." The CEO turned, instantly annoyed. "Excuse me." The guard hesitated, recognizing him. "Oh, sir, I didn't realize you were here." "You're harassing this man," the CEO said sharply. The guard stammered, "We've had complaints." He's blocking the display. He's painting souls, the CEO said, his voice rising. Leave him alone. The crowd went dead silent again. The guard froze. Yes, sir. David chuckled quietly. It's okay, Mr. Rains. I'm used to it. Well, you shouldn't have to be, the CEO replied. From now on, no one tells you to move. Not here. David smiled faintly. You don't own the street, sir. The CEO grinned. I don't. But I can make sure the people who think they do remember who really walks on it. He took one last look at the painting, then said softly, Keep it safe for me. David nodded. It already is. As the CEO turned to leave, David called out quietly, Mr. Rains. He stopped. Yes. You said you wanted to help me live better. Yes. David smiled. Then come back tomorrow. Let me paint you again, but this time, bring the truth you hide. The CEO frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. What truth? He asked. David just smiled. You'll know when you're ready to open your eyes. The CEO looked back at him, eyes narrowing. Then he walked away, deep in thought. And as he disappeared into the city, David whispered softly, They always come back when the canvas calls. The wind picked up again, brushing over the painting, a portrait of a man haunted by his past, yet unknowingly standing at the edge of redemption. And tomorrow, the truth would begin to unfold. The next morning, the city felt different. The same honking cars, the same impatient crowds, but to Mr. Rains, it all sounded louder. Clearer. He didn't know why, but that blind man's words had followed him home like a melody that wouldn't stop playing. He'd spent half the night staring at that empty wall in his penthouse, the one where awards and newspaper clippings hung around an untouched space. That was where his son's picture used to be. He hadn't looked at it since the accident. But now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw David's painting, the one with the hollow eyes, the little boy behind him. And that last sentence, Bring the truth you hide. What truth? By the time dawn broke, he couldn't resist anymore. He got dressed. No tie, no chauffeur, no company car. Just a plain gray jacket and sunglasses. He wanted to blend in for once. When he arrived at the same corner, David was already there, sitting quietly, facing the morning sun he couldn't see. Good morning, Mr. Rains, David said softly without turning. The CEO blinked. How did you know it was me? You walk with hesitation today, David said. Yesterday, your steps were full of pride. Today, they're full of questions. Rains smiled faintly. You're good. I listen, David said simply. And I remember footsteps. The CEO sat down beside him, on the curb. People stared. No one expected to see the city's most powerful man sitting next to a blind painter like an old friend. David turned his face toward him. Did you bring it? Bring what? The truth you hide. Rains hesitated. Then slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old, folded photo. He placed it in David's hands. David ran his fingertips over the glossy surface, tracing the edges carefully until his fingers stopped on a small curve, the outline of a boy's face. Your son, David said quietly. Rains nodded, his voice heavy. Michael. He was 9. David's voice softened. Tell me about him. Rains looked down. He was light. He could find joy in the smallest things. One day, he painted our old dog blue because he said it matched his soul. I yelled at him. David chuckled gently. Did the dog mind? Rains smiled for the first time that day. No. The dog wagged his tail. The smile faded. The accident happened a week later. David didn't say a word. He just listened. Rains continued quietly. I was working late. I promised I'd come home early and take him to the fair. But there was a deal on the line, so I stayed. His throat tightened. His mom took him without me. They were hit by a drunk driver. The silence that followed was unbearable. Rains took a shaky breath. I sold the house, moved to the city, built everything I could. Money, power, fame. But I couldn't build one thing that mattered. I couldn't rebuild him. David nodded slowly. And that's what you brought with you today. Rains frowned. What do you mean? "The weight," David said softly. "The guilt you've been carrying like a portrait turned to the wall." The CEO's eyes burned. "How do you know all that?" "I told you," David said. "I paint souls." He set a fresh canvas in front of him. "Let's try again." Rains blinked. "Again?" "Yes. But this time, don't pretend. Don't pose. Just be the father who misses his son." Rains hesitated, then exhaled slowly. David picked up his brush. "Now talk. Tell me something he used to say." Rains smiled faintly. "He used to tell me that every person has a secret color inside them. He said mine was gray." David's brush moved across the canvas. "He wasn't wrong." Rains laughed quietly. "And yours?" David paused. "Mine used to be orange. Now, it's the sound of rain." Rains frowned. "That's not a color." David smiled. "It is if you can't see." They both laughed softly. The crowd passing by looked at them strangely, two men from different worlds, sharing something invisible. Minutes passed. Then an hour. David's hand never wavered. Every stroke felt like a confession, every pause like a prayer. Finally, he stopped. His hand rested on the canvas. "It's done." Rains hesitated. "Already?" "Truth doesn't take long," David said. "It just waits to be heard." Rains turned the painting around, and froze. It wasn't just him this time. The canvas showed two figures, the CEO kneeling with his eyes closed, and a small boy standing behind him, hands on his shoulders, smiling. But what took Rains' breath away was the boy's eyes. They were open, bright, alive. And in those eyes, he saw peace. "This," Rains whispered. "This is what I've dreamed every night." David smiled softly. "Then maybe you were ready to see it." Rains blinked back tears. "You have no idea what this means to me." David tilted his head. "Oh, I think I do." Rains looked at him with awe. "You ever think maybe you didn't lose your sight by accident?" David chuckled. "Maybe I didn't. Maybe it was borrowed, to show others what they've lost." Rains nodded slowly. Then, almost instinctively, he said, "I want everyone to see your work." David smiled faintly. "They already do." "No," Rains said. "Not like this. I mean, an exhibit. A gallery. Your story deserves to be known." David laughed softly. "I'm not a story, Mr. Rains. I'm a reminder. But you could help so many people." "I already am," David said, interrupting gently. "One at a time." Rains leaned back, watching him. "You really don't care about fame, do you?" David smiled. "Fame doesn't see faces. People do." Just then, a young woman walked up. She looked nervous. Excuse me. Are you the blind painter everyone's talking about?" David smiled. "That's what they tell me." She held out a photo. "Could you paint this?" "It's my mother. She passed away." David nodded. "Of course." Rains watched as David carefully took the photo, feeling its edges like a ritual. The girl's eyes shimmered. He whispered to himself, "How many lives has this man touched?" Over the next hour, more people came, each carrying a story, a memory, a photo. And David listened to them all, painting quietly, giving pieces of peace back to strangers. And Rains, he just stood there, realizing for the first time that maybe this was what success looked like. Not the towers he built, not the signatures he chased, the power to make people feel seen. When the crowd finally thinned, Rains turned back to David. "You know," he said quietly, "you're changing lives out here." David smiled. "So are you." Rains frowned. "Me? I haven't done anything." David's blind eyes faced him. "You came back." That simple sentence hit harder than anything he'd heard in years. Before Rains could respond, David suddenly paused. His head tilted slightly, as if hearing something distant. "You okay?" Rains asked. David nodded slowly. "Sometimes. I hear colors change." Rains blinked. "What does that mean?" David's voice was calm but strange. "Something's about to shift." At that exact moment, A car screeched nearby. A taxi swerved to avoid a motorbike and crashed into a street pole, barely 10 feet away. People screamed. Rains jumped up, rushing forward. "Call 911. David stayed seated, his hands gripping the stool. Rains pulled open the taxi door and helped the driver out. He was shaken but alive. The crowd gathered again, whispering, filming. When Rains turned back to check on David, the blind man was still sitting perfectly still, his head slightly lifted as if waiting for something. Rains walked over. "You okay?" David nodded slowly. "Yes. Just listening." "To what?" "The sound of change," he said quietly. Rains frowned, confused, but before he could speak, David whispered something that sent chills down his spine. "Tomorrow," he said, "your world will look different. Be ready to see what you couldn't before." Rains blinked. "What are you talking about?" David only smiled. "You'll understand. Come back one last time." Rains stared at him for a long second. Something about the tone, the stillness, it felt final. He wanted to ask more, but David just turned his face toward the sound of the wind and said softly, "Some people open their eyes only when they lose what blinds them." Rains hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll come tomorrow." David smiled faintly. "Then bring your heart. The eyes will follow." That night, Rains couldn't sleep. The words kept circling in his mind. Your world will look different. He walked around his penthouse, staring at the city lights that usually made him feel powerful. But tonight, they looked like tiny candles, bright, fragile, easily extinguished. He opened a drawer and pulled out his son's drawing, a stick figure family, colored in wild crayon hues. He hadn't touched it in years. He smiled, tears in his eyes. "I miss you, buddy." And for the first time since the accident, he whispered out loud, "I'm sorry." The next morning, he dressed simply again and made his way to the street corner. But when he arrived, the spot was empty. No stool. No easel. No paint jars. Only a small folded note, resting on the ground. Rains picked it up, his heart pounding. The paper was smudged with paint, the handwriting shaky but clear. "When the color inside you turns light again, that's when you'll see me. Keep painting your life. David." Rains stood there, frozen. He looked around. No sign of him anywhere. The man who painted souls was gone. But as Rains looked down the street, something caught his eye. Across the road, on the brick wall of an old building, was a mural. It hadn't been there yesterday. It was a massive painting of a blind man smiling, his hand resting on the shoulder of a boy with open eyes. And beneath it, in small white letters, it said, "Sometimes, you must lose sight to truly see." Rains felt his knees weaken. He stared at the mural for a long time, the world around him fading into silence. Then, slowly, he smiled, a smile that felt like the first sunrise after a storm. He whispered to himself, "I see you now, David." And in that moment, he finally opened his eyes. 4 hours, Mr. Rains stayed by that mural. People passed, snapped photos, whispered, but he couldn't move. He kept running his fingertips along the wall like maybe, just maybe, he could feel the brushstrokes that weren't supposed to exist. Because David was blind. And yet, the mural was flawless. Every line, every shade, every expression, alive. Finally he whispered, "How did you do this, David?" A voice behind him answered softly, "He didn't do it alone." Rains turned. A young boy stood there, maybe 17, holding a paint-stained backpack. His eyes were tired but bright. "You knew him?" Rains asked quickly. The boy nodded. "He was my uncle." Rains froze. "Uncle?" The boy smiled faintly. "He used to talk about you. Said you'd come back when you were ready to see." Rains stepped closer. "Where is he? Please, tell me." The boy's face softened. "He's gone, sir." Rains's throat tightened. "Gone? What do you mean?" "He passed last night," the boy said quietly. "Heart stopped while he slept. Peacefully. He told me he'd finished his last painting." Rains felt the world tilt. "His last painting," he whispered, staring again at the mural. "This." The boy nodded. "He guided me. Told me exactly what to paint, every color, every curve. Said it had to be done before morning. I didn't understand why, until now. Rains reached out and touched the boy's shoulder. He told you what it would look like? Without seeing. The boy smiled sadly. He said he could finally see again. Just before midnight. Rains blinked. See. The boy nodded. He said, "The dark is lifting." Then he smiled and said, "Tell Mr. Rains the eyes are open now." Rains stepped back, his chest aching. He knew he was going. "Yeah," the boy whispered. But he wasn't scared. He said he'd waited 20 years to paint light again. Rains swallowed hard, his eyes blurring. "I never even thanked him properly." "You just did," the boy said gently. "You came back." They stood together in silence. Cars honked in the distance, but for that moment, the world felt suspended between colors. Rains finally asked, "What will happen to his things?" "His paintings." The boy looked down. "He wanted you to have them." "Me." "He left a letter. It's at his shelter. Said you'd know what to do." Later that afternoon, Rains arrived at a small community shelter 2 blocks from the street corner. The woman at the front desk smiled sadly when she heard his name. "Mr. Rains. David talked about you. Said you were a man trying to find his way back." She led him to a tiny storage room. Inside, there were maybe 20 canvases stacked against the wall. Faces of strangers, laughter, tears, mothers, children, life frozen in color. On top of the stack lay a sealed envelope. His name written in faint, uneven letters. He opened it slowly. "Mr. Rains. If you're reading this, it means the light has changed hands. You asked me once if I wished to see again. I do now, but not the way you think. I saw you long before you saw me. I saw a father buried under marble towers, a man who traded color for control. You didn't need sight to see the world. You needed loss to feel it. Every soul I painted taught me something. But yours reminded me why I was still alive. You thought I gave you truth, but you gave me peace. You let me finish what I started, to paint a life that still believed in good. Don't hang my work in a museum. Hang it where the lost can see themselves again. The world needs more eyes open. David." Rains folded the letter carefully, tears falling onto the page. Then he looked at the paintings again. So many stories. So many silent lives. He spent the next weeks doing exactly what David asked. News spread fast. CEO turns blind artist's work into Free Street Gallery. Rains turned the abandoned subway passage under his company's building into a living art corridor. Each wall displayed David's paintings with small brass plates. Not names, just single words: hope, loss, forgiveness, truth. He called it, "The light you can't see." Visitors came from every corner: students, mothers, executives. People who thought they had everything and realized they didn't. And right at the center, under a skylight that poured golden sunlight down at noon, hung the painting of the CEO and his son. Every day Rains would sit in front of it for a few minutes, silent, breathing. One afternoon, the young boy from before came to see him. "It's beautiful," he said. "He'd be proud." Rains smiled faintly. "He is proud. I can feel it." The boy looked around. "You changed, sir." Rains chuckled softly. "I didn't change. I just opened my eyes." He turned to the boy. "What about you? You paint too." The boy shrugged shyly. "A little. But not like him." Rains smiled. "Maybe that's the point. Don't paint like him. Paint what he saw in you." The boy nodded slowly. "He used to tell me I'd finish the story he started." Rains placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then finish it." Months passed. The gallery grew. What began as 20 canvases became hundreds. Donations, collaborations, artists from shelters and schools painting their stories. People started calling it the Street of Light. One day, while closing up, Rains noticed a small package left on a bench. No name, no note. Just a wrapped frame. He opened it and froze. Inside was a new painting. A portrait of him, sitting in front of the mural, hand over his heart. And behind him, faint but visible, stood David. Rains smiled. You still watching me, old friend? He hung it right at the entrance. Weeks later, during an interview, a reporter asked him, Mr. Rains, you've built empires. Why dedicate so much to a man you barely knew? Rains smiled. Because he gave me back something I'd buried. And what's that? The reporter asked. He looked straight into the camera. Sight. The clip went viral. But unlike his business fame, this time, Rains didn't care about views or headlines. He cared that people finally looked at one another differently. He began funding art programs for blind children, built tactile painting studios where sighted and unsighted artists worked side by side. And every year, on the anniversary of David's mural, he'd stand by that same corner, no cameras, no crowd, and whisper, "Thank you for showing me what eyes can't." One evening, while locking the gallery, he noticed the sunset reflecting off the murals. The light hit the paint just right, making every color glow as if breathing. A breeze passed through, soft, warm, carrying a faint scent of turpentine and rain. Rains smiled. "Hello, David." He could almost hear the chuckle in reply, "Keep painting, Mr. Rains." And somewhere deep inside, he knew David was still painting, just from another view. Rains looked at the last visitors leaving, a mother and her son holding hands, the boy smiling up at the colors. He felt tears rise again, but this time they were gentle, peaceful. He whispered, "You were right, David." The eyes did follow. If this story moved you, share it so someone else can open their eyes too. And remember, sometimes the people who see least understand most. Subscribe to RES Stories for more real soul tales that remind you, the light's always there, even when you can't see it.